past few decades, China has been a shining example of economic development. The Asian giant has gone from being a poor fiefdom of farmers, peasants, and fishermen to becoming an industrial and technological power, and even a leader in advanced sectors such as renewable energies. China's success has been such that, in many areas, it is surprisingly wealthy. For example, cities like Shanghai have skyscrapers that rival those of New York itself. Technology overflows in the streets with luxurious electric vehicles, and bars where robots are the servers. And it is not uncommon to see a multitude of luxury brand stores like Gucci and Dior full of Chinese people spending money. At first glance, you may say that China is already very rich, much richer even than some European countries. However, make no mistake, the data shows a very different reality. In terms of GDP per capita and following its own government's official figures, China is still quite poor. We're talking about an economy similar to those of Argentina, Kazakhstan, and Costa Rica. In other words, despite its progress, China still remains a relatively poor country. Or at least, that's what their official figures say. Because what if I told you that those figures could be wrong? Well, yes, because in 2010, a statement was leaked by the then Vice Premier, Li Keqiang, in which he confessed that Chinese official data were unreliable and subject to human manipulation. So if the official GDP data are not reliable, what is the true level of China's current wealth? There are two main theories here. One is that China is actually much richer than the figures suggest. Proof of this would be the luxury and technological level that can be seen in the cities. But in contrast to that, there is another theory that suggests just the opposite. In a well-known report by The Economist, based on a scientific paper from the University of Chicago, it was explained that China's economy and those of other autocratic countries could be vastly overvalued. According to this article, the Chinese government itself, in order to keep its population happy and to project an image of strength to the outside world, may have manipulated its GDP data upwards. Specifically, it is noted that China could actually be 60% poorer than official GDP figures indicate. Yes, you heard me correctly. 60% poorer. Crazy. But let's not fool ourselves. Apart from the fact that this figure already seems quite exaggerated by itself, the fact is that the calculation from which it is derived does not seem very accurate. This calculation averages how other autocratic countries outside China, such as Thailand, manipulate their data and extrapolates these manipulations to the specific case of the Asian giant. It is not a specific study of China, which is why it is probably terribly biased and highly inaccurate. So the only thing we know for sure so far, and in the words of former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang himself, is that Chinese GDP might be mismeasured. The question is China richer or poorer than its figures claim? Well, today on Visualeconomik, we will answer that question once and for all. Let's get started. Well, if we want to know what China's real wealth is, we need to find a way to measure it objectively. And how can it be done? Well, you see, Li Keqiang, that same Chinese minister who said that the official figures were unreliable, devised a method for analyzing the Chinese economy in a reasonably objective way. To this end, he developed an index based on three objective factors: electricity consumption, the amount of goods transported by trains, and the volume of credit distributed in the economy. Each factor was assigned a certain weight and averaged. The result was an objective index that could measure economic growth, the Li Keqiang Index. Thus, if the index rose, it meant an increase in electricity consumption, freight transport, or credit in the economy. Therefore, this increase implied an almost unequivocal sign that the economy was booming. Thereafter, the Li Keqiang Index became so famous and reliable that even large investment banks started to use it over the official data.
National City Bank of New York indicated that the Keqiang Index has better ability to explain industrial profits, and they compiled the Keqiang Index values to forecast the profitability of MSCI in China, Song Shuguan he Zhonggui.
Not bad, don't you think? Well, now that we know about the existence of this objective index, the question is, what does the Li Keqiang Index tell us about China's real economic growth? Well, to be blunt, not so much. As you see on the screen, the Li Keqiang Index shows levels above and below the GDP growth reported by the Chinese authorities. For example, between 2009 and 2012, it showed growth well above the official figures, but it was just the opposite between 2014 and 2016. That is, sometimes the index suggests that China is doing better than the official figures, and sometimes it suggests that it's doing worse. Also, be careful because the Li Keqiang Index could have serious errors that should be taken into account. One is that in China, the financial system is mainly dominated by the government. That means that when a crisis comes, the government uses the banks to issue a lot of credit and prime the economy. And what does that mean? Well, remember that the Li Keqiang Index is largely calculated using credit figures. But of course, if the government artificially modifies credit, since it controls the banks, the index is likely to be biased upwards. In fact, this is something that could explain why between 2009 and 2012, the index rose so much with respect to the official figures. At that time, the Chinese government boosted credit to strengthen its domestic market in the face of the global crisis, so the calculation might have been altered. Nevertheless, remember that the Li Keqiang Index depends not only on credit, but also on the volume of goods and electricity consumption. So what's the problem? These two factors also have problems. On the one hand, China has gone from having a mainly agricultural economy to incorporating more and more industry and services. And the point is that each sector requires a very different level of freight transport, so measuring them all the same in the index could be misleading. On the other hand, in terms of electricity consumption, China has been increasingly efficient. That is, its economy needed less and less electricity to grow, but the index uses the consumption meter without taking this progress into account. So in short, Li Keqiang's calculation neither provides conclusive answers nor does it take into account other aspects that could bias it. But what if there were a way to improve this index, to make it more refined and give us a stronger answer? Well, that's what we're just about to see, so stay tuned.
The Falcon Eye.
Pay close attention to the following image. What you are looking at is the nighttime satellite image of North Korea versus South Korea. As you can see, South Korea, which is much richer, is much more brightly lit than its northern neighbor. But this case is not unique. If we go to the island of Hispaniola, an island that contains two different countries, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, we will see that the Haitian part is much darker than the Dominican part. And again, this is because Haiti is much poorer. In short, there is a strong correlation between nighttime light and the level of wealth and prosperity. And that is something that could be used to measure China's real economic growth. Well, that's just what the famous economist Xavier Salah-Imati and his co-authors did in the scientific study you are seeing on the screen. The study used satellite-recorded nighttime lights to refine the Li Keqiang Index calculations and come up with a realistic estimate of China's GDP. And what were the results? Well, take a look. According to this study, the Chinese economy has been undervalued since at least 2008. In other words, China's economy is growing much more than what its official data says. Here, we're talking about a cumulative difference that could reach up to 20%. So, is this the definitive proof that China is much, much richer than the data says? Well, wait a minute, let's not go too fast here. On the one hand, it should be noted that the study only covers data up to 2015. In fact, if we look again at the graph, we will see that between 2005 and 2008, the official data were greatly overestimated. In that sense, it is possible that the periods prior to those in the graph make up the difference. But on the other hand, it must also be taken into account that the use of satellite-recorded nighttime lights is not perfect. There are economic sectors that do not require as much light at night. There is also light pollution. And the study even uses different satellites with different light sensitivities that could bias the sample. Well, despite all that, it's the best we've got, right? Well, Visualeconomik viewers, I'm telling you, there's a lot more to the story. Listen up.
The dissenting version.
So far, we've seen two ways of measuring the Chinese economy besides the official data. One is the Li Keqiang Index, and another is the use of nighttime lights. But we still have to look at one last method, the discrepancy in the collection of indirect taxes, such as value-added tax. Think about it. Taxes such as VAT always tend to represent a fixed part of sales. That is to say, if VAT is 20% and production is 100, it is normal that revenue will always tend to be 20. If production increases, revenue will increase disproportionately. Likewise, in the opposite production scenario, revenue will decrease. Well, in this way, we can follow the VAT figures as a proxy indicator of real economic activity. And that's exactly what was done in this new study you see on the screen. So, what was the result? Well, as you can see in this graph, VAT collection in the Chinese industrial sector has been consistently below the official figures. This is something that is also repeated in other sectors, and which indicates that, in reality, the Chinese economy has grown much less than its official GDP in recent years. In other words, the results are diametrically opposed to the study with satellite lights. But remember that apart from this measure, the authors of the study offer an explanation behind China's seemingly overvalued economy. Take a look. In China, the statistical data are collected by local governments. The problem is that these governments receive political benefits the better their investment, consumption, and economic growth are. So, as soon as the law is made, the loophole appears. Many local Chinese politicians inflate the statistics to receive rewards. Keep in mind that this is not only us saying this. It is something that Chinese government officials themselves know and publicly comment on.
In 2014, Su Xianchun, a vice director of China's Bureau of Statistics at the time, publicly stated that statistical data is inflated by local statistical offices.
In any case, as the Chinese government is aware that local statisticians manipulate their figures, they usually correct the data downwards when producing official statistics such as GDP. Even so, according to the study we have shown above, when it comes to correcting these data, the central government is falling far short. For example, in the investment figures, there is a huge difference between the official data and the figures adjusted by the economists in the study. Investment is actually 7% lower than what is published in the government statistics. Likewise, all this translates into a GDP that would also be much lower than the official figure. Specifically, it is estimated that between 2010 and 2016, the Chinese economy grew 1.8 percentage points less than what the government reports each year, thus confirming the tax discrepancies we saw earlier. So you see, on the one hand, we have studies that suggest that China is poorer than the official data say, but on the other hand, we have studies that suggest that it is richer. Which one should we choose? Well, there are no magic or absolute solutions here. Whatever the case, we have made a compilation of several serious economic studies, and as you can see, the conclusions are quite diverse. 4 studies say that the Chinese economy is overvalued. 4 others say that the data is not biased to one side or the other. And finally, one study, the one on nighttime lights, says that it is undervalued. From the number of studies, it is easier to think that the Chinese economy is indeed overvalued, and that China is poorer than its figures say. But the number of studies does not equal the quality of the study, so it's difficult to draw unequivocal conclusions. So beyond what the science says, what opinion can we extract from this whole matter? Is there anything else out there that could resolve these doubts? Well, let's take a look.
A matter of margin.
One thing that is clear is that autocratic regimes often manipulate their data. This is something that has been analyzed in multiple studies, such as the one you're seeing on screen, and that, in fact, we have seen throughout history in dictatorial countries such as the Soviet Union. Therefore, it would not be so outlandish to think that China does the same. Now then, how do you explain the enormous wealth in Chinese cities with so much technology, skyscrapers, and luxury stores everywhere? If China is as poor as the data says, it should have poor cities. Well, this is something that can be explained by the tremendous regional inequality experienced in the country. The coastal areas of China are much wealthier than the inland areas. And yes, it is true that cities like Shanghai and Beijing are very rich. In fact, these cities have wealth levels similar to those of developed countries such as South Korea, Japan, and Spain. Yet, beyond these major cities, we can also find really impoverished places in China with poor infrastructure and very little technology. Be that as it may, if it is true that there is manipulation in the Chinese data, this manipulation probably exists within certain margins. At the end of the day, when a country's GDP is calculated, it is never done accurately. There is always a margin of error, and within that margin, politicians can stretch the figure without it being too noticeable. In fact, this is precisely one of the hypotheses of some research studies.
The margin of error in much of the published data is likely to be sufficiently large to allow the statistical authority a choice of final value from a relatively wide range of equally correct values.
This would explain the discrepancy in the data and the different results in the studies, and ultimately, the difficulty in determining which way the data are biased. In any case, and having reached this point, now the final opinion is up to you. Do you think China's GDP is manipulated? Is China richer or poorer than its figures say? Leave me your answers in the comments, and as always, don't forget that Visualeconomik has videos every single week. So subscribe, give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you soon.